So one of the first questions when I go out and visit with people is who's controlling what? So we have to go back and look at the state constitution, Article 6. And it clearly defines who's doing what, and it says the legislature is in charge of making sure this happens. The state school board has a lot of authority, but they are to generally supervise the schools. Don't read all that. And then the legislature in the past has set down and put a law in place defining what the local school boards are responsible for. And I want you to take note that down here it says they are to approve and adopt suitable textbooks and study material for use therein, subject to the plans, methods, rules, and regulations of the State Board of Education. But there is a lot of authority and power given to the local school board. So local control is something we cherish. All of us cherish that idea of local control. It's good and bad if you're trying to ensure that all students across the state receive an equal opportunity for education. We are trusting all the school boards then to ensure equal opportunity with the funds that we've allocated out to the schools. We approve the budget. The local school boards spend the taxpayer funds however they want. We have no control over that. And everybody needs to understand that when they say teacher salaries are low, we have nothing to do with that. That is determined by the local school boards, period. We have no control over that. We can coddle, we can try to convince them they need to pay teachers more, but we have no control over that. So where are we today? Unfortunately, the test scores that we're seeing are either flat or falling. And the testing methods, we like to look at information and say, well, how are we doing over the years? But every year, if the testing changes, we can't compare anything. So we really don't have a great idea. So we look at some of the national tests. And the spending, it hasn't gone down. It goes up every year for schools. The courts have said that the legislature can now count all spending towards education. That's a big deal. The courts have also said that outcomes may be considered in a formula situation, however you want to fund the schools. The courts chided us a little bit because we've come to them, but we didn't have real data, real information. Steve and I then this last fall and winter were on an interim committee where we gathered reams and reams of data, so that's no longer an excuse. And then Senator Abrams took that ball even further and gathered more information, and I'm sure he'll tell you all about that after a bit. But now we have the data, so we can convince even the attorneys in the room that we have good information. The testing, some of which we are looking at, are both the ACT and its NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress scores, and they're broken down by state. They take statistical sampling of students across each state and compare all of that. I'm only going to show you one slide, and this is for the grade 4 math. And this is one thing that keeps me awake at night. Not only are the scores either flat or falling, and this one is not as fallen as much as some of them, but look at this line down here and the difference between the two. And that's defined as the low income versus the not so low income. You can call it whatever you want, the fortunate or less fortunate, however you want to define that. And I had Department of Education Wednesday, I believe it was, they sent me a report. I asked how many are in those two categories, and it's just about even, about 50% in each category within our state. Now in Sedgwick County, that number drops up to about 76%, somewhere in that range, down in this category. But statewide average is about 50%. And that hadn't changed for years and years and years. So these students here are leaving school, and their chances of getting ahead and improving their lives are diminished unless they're very hardworking and so forth. So compared to the rest of the nation, we look at a chart and it says, well, across, if we compare ourselves to all the other states in the nation, we're about in the middle of the pack. And you say, well, that's not too bad. That's pretty good. But then you look in our ranking among the world. Over here, keep hitting the wrong button, I'm sorry. 29th in the world. So we have to change. We're going to have to do something different to get our children to a point where they're going to be good citizens, productive members of society. So that's what we're working on, and we beat our heads against this every day. But these numbers alarm me, and they should alarm you as well. So what can you and I do? At the state level, we are trying our best to require the education entities to do their job and hold them responsible. That's not easy to do. That's like trying to pin down a piece of mercury floating around on the table that moves on you. But the big one is personal responsibility. The state school board, I told you how much power they have. We need to find good people to run for office and find a dedicated person to run. Run yourselves or find somebody to run. And I think there are, 4 seats open this next election? Something like that. 5 seats are open out of the 10, so half of them. The local school board. This is important because, like I told you, they determine how the money is spent at the local level. They have the control. So again, run for office or find somebody. And then down below that, you have your parents, grandparents, taxpayers. We all need to be visiting the schools and asking to see the materials they're using to teach, how they're teaching it, and so forth. But ask questions, drive them crazy, and get a handle on what's going on in the schools. Go to the school board meetings and ask to see their budget numbers. By law, what we passed, I think 3 years ago now, they have to produce the budget, not only have it available at school board meetings, but they have to have it on their website on the front page at an easily accessible button. Most of them aren't doing that, but anyway, they're supposed to. And get involved in the process. Without involvement, you'll get the government or the system you deserve. It's just a fact, folks. Critical findings, in the 4 years I've been there, and this is intuitive, we all knew this, but all the data and all the testimonies we've listened to, there's 2 things that will determine a person's future: their ability to read and a good teacher in the classroom. Those 2 things come out very clear through these 4 years, no doubt about it. For one, ability to read, the parents, the grandparents, the churches, the nonprofits, anybody, they all need to get involved and place emphasis on that need. And the schools then should be involved with the follow-up. But this is bigger than the schools. This is important. For number 2, the region system needs to pick up the ball and place more emphasis on teacher training, elite the profession, so we can say they need to be paid more to keep them in the profession, and get highly qualified applicants to go into that profession. And then we need to ensure that their pay scale is commensurate with their training and their abilities. Now, they're fighting us on this one big time because the unions do not want to differentiate because it causes rancor among the ranks. Over and over we hear this story, but the school boards decide that, the union doesn't. But we want to keep the best teachers in the classroom because right now, if you're a good teacher but you want elevated, what do? You go into administration. That's where the money is. We want to keep them in the classroom, not move them into administration. Now, switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about the economy in our state, what's going on. The job growth has been good, very good. Unemployment rate has gone down, right around 4%, looking good. New business formation keeps going up, and it's still going up. Where's the money come from to run the state? Primarily from sales and use tax, and over here, income taxes, to include corporate and individual. That's where the money comes from. Now, we're living in a perfect storm right now. People say the recession's over. I will disagree with them. It's not quite over yet. So we're having some problems. And we can talk all day about the income tax rates and all that. I'd rather not get into that. So where's the money go? Almost 63% goes into education. That's a huge amount of money. Billions and billions. And the rest of it over here is in the Medicare and the other social services. So there's not a lot of money left over for everything else everybody wants done in the state. But they want more. Always more. Education funding has not gone down. It's gone up every year. Now, because of what I told you in the beginning, we can count all funds that go in. The CAPERS is part of that funding, and so the CAPERS is counted in there. But even if you take the CAPERS chunk out, which is the yellow, it's still gone up. And I've got the spreadsheets. I can show you all that and prove it. Nobody wants to believe that, but it's true. The Medicaid portion, which is also a huge expense, has gone up and up. And those are billions, not millions. And the SGF numbers have gone up. Back in these years when the Supreme Court decided to get into the appropriations process, we got a little behind and had to make up for that. We did that. And this is another thing that keeps me awake at night. I'm not a big believer in debt. Let's get a little history lesson. Our state, when we were formed, about 107,000 people. In 2014, we're right at 3 million. But look, we are less than 1% of the total population of the country. And that population determines your representation in the House, in Congress. We're slipping, folks. Sedgwick County, close to 500,000 in the last census. Look at the debt that Sedgwick County is carrying, almost $5 billion. And then I looked up the school district, 259, almost $500 million in debt. Total Kansas debt is right around $24 billion. That doesn't include the CAPERS, how far behind we are in making the CAPERS payments. And that's another story, another meeting in itself, where CAPERS stands. That's about, last time I looked, it's about 9.5 million short of being funded. So if you want to go help pay off the debt, you can write a check for about $17,000 and help, and that's taxpayers, each taxpayer. And then if you add in, and I know these numbers are old, that's in October 15, so we're about up to $20 trillion debt right now. If you want to help on the national and the state level, write a check for about $175,000. And then we can get out of this hole. And down below are all the references where I found this information. Now, another area that surprised me, I asked the Department of Labor to give me the number of government employees on a per county basis. Those that are colored in that kind of a teal, that little broader area there, those are all over 35%. And I can't see from here, but some of those numbers are over 50%. And the last time I checked, Kansas is ranked about third in the country for the number of government employees on a per capita basis. Alaska and Wyoming are ahead of us because of their populations, but the demand for government services. Which county is the most conservative in the state? Johnson County, only 9%. Then you break that down and you look at local government jobs out of the total. The other one included U.S. government or federal jobs along with local. This is just local government. Also big numbers. And what that means, you'll have to decide for yourself. But they provided me this one too, the private sector jobs. If you're looking for a job, or one of your children is looking for a job, they need to be looking over here in these dark colors. That's where the action is in our state right now. And with that, I turn it over to the Honorable Senator Abrams.
Each one of the lasers. Sometimes when you're starting out in the legislature, things sometimes look decent. They sometimes look decent, and you just got to turn around and look behind you occasionally, because sometimes they aren't as it seems. I've been there many times. Ron has been there many times, that we turned around and said, you know, everything's just going really great, and all at once you got this challenge that's coming up upon you. Well, some of these things are happening like that. What this is, I'm going to give just a brief synopsis of the bills that were adopted through the conference committee report. These conference committee reports, as I'm sure that all of you know, are the bills that have either been worked through both the House and the Senate, or at least one of them, and then they are adopted by the other one in conference committee report. Senate bill is Freedom from Unsafe Restraint and Seclusion, also called ESI, Emergency Safety Intervention. And what that is that there are those students that have some problems, that they act out. They may throw a fit, may throw a chair, may hit somebody, they're in years past, and what has been done is that they would, the teachers would have the authority to, if they didn't respond, to sit down and shut up, or sit down and please be quiet. If they didn't sit down and take care of themselves and control themselves, then they would have a room that they would be able to put the student in, and it was called a seclusion room. Well, and so there are many people in the greater things of education have said that seclusion is not appropriate. And so last year we put together a bill that allowed the task force to come together to be able to identify what the best practices were for seclusion, and that's what this is, the interim task force, and they came up with this, and it was adopted by 100% of those on the committee, and as a matter of fact, that was exactly what is in the bill now. This is the bond and interest state aid bill. You heard briefly talking about that there's a lot of debt that the state of Kansas has. Well, as a matter of fact, of that, that number was not up there, but the amount of debt that USD's has is $5.4 billion across the state of Kansas. $5.4 billion. To me, that seems like a fair amount of money. And yet at the same time, the state of Kansas, on much of it, is required to pay part of it because of equalization. That's because of the things that went through in the 1990 lawsuit, which we'll come back to in a little bit later. And so we put a cap on that it's to limit the amount of state aid that the state will do. So what that means is that the state is saying it's going to be on a 6-year rolling average. In general, it's going to be about $200 million. I mean, in round numbers, it's going to fluctuate a little bit, but it's going to be about that number, as opposed to, because it's been going up by 15 to 20 million per year every year for the last several years. And so at some point in time, you get to thinking that, gee, that's a lot of money. Let's see, that implementation will be done by application, and determination of the applications will be done by the State Board of Education, and they will determine that. And if there's not enough money to go around, or too many applications to go around, what they will eventually do is to say that this is a good, worthy project, and this one needs to be put off till next year, or however that's going to be done. And then at that point in time, it goes back to the people of the USD, the citizens of that USD, to have a vote on it. If indeed a district decides that, we got turned down, or we don't get any state aid, they can still do it, irrespective of the state. It's just that in order to, if they're going to get state aid, they have to go through this process. The reason for the bond and interest state aid, I've kind of briefly went to that in 2003-04. It was $50 million, and it's been in 18-19. It's going to be estimated to be about $199 million. You can see how fast it's grown from 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 87, 96, 104, 111. It just keeps growing, and pretty soon, and on top of that, the state of Kansas, the legislature, the governor, has no authority to say, no, I don't think we can afford that. We're obligated to pay money of which we have no authority to say we can't afford. So that's the reason for the state aid bond and interest bill. This is the deaf and hard of hearing assessment bill. I'm sure that everyone knows that if you're going to be successful, you have to have language acquisition. You have to know how to, at least around here, you have to know how to speak, write, read English. That's the traditional. Well, those students that are deaf and or hard of hearing, they obviously cannot learn English very well or not at all, and therefore language acquisition is not something that they can do. Therefore, those people that have that kind of a problem, they end up with a lot of problems because they cannot be successful because they don't have language acquisition. And you also are probably intuitively know that if you're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, you can learn a second language or a third language relatively easy. You can become quite fluent in that at that age. For somebody that's as old as I am, how difficult, or as old as many of you are in this room, how difficult is it to learn a second language? It's hard. Can you do it? Yeah, well, yeah, you can, but it's extremely difficult, and you never learn it fluently. You don't learn the idioms that you learn if you learn it as a youngster like that. Well, the same thing applies for deaf and hard of hearing. If they don't learn it at a very young age, less than 8 years of age, they basically don't learn it. And so what this does is allow that to be able to assess those students, identify those students, and be able to get them into a language acquisition program. That's the bottom line of this. Student Online Protection Act. A couple, 3 years ago, the legislature passed a bill that said that student data was protected from government. For instance, school district to school district or school district to agency, department to department, they had to take care and make sure that they didn't sell it, number one. Number two, that they had to protect that information. But that did not protect any third-party vendors from doing that same thing. And there's a lot of third-party vendors. There's a few hundred at least that can do that. Most of the test people come in and they're third-party vendors. They could have sold that information prior to this, and what this does is trying to protect that from happening. It is ACT, Google, Lexia, Microsoft, and there's a few hundred. I've already said that. This is a fairly simple, non-controversial bill. This is about from KBOR. Periodically, every couple, 3 years, they go through and they charge fees to a lot of the community colleges and private schools and Phoenix, University of Phoenix, and schools like that for accreditation. And this just adjusts a few of these fees, and for the most part, the fees went down. Excuse me. This prospectus bill, this is one of those that I am really excited about. I think it's kind of a cool deal. If you graduate with a degree, a major, let's pick one, business administration, what is the average length of time it takes to graduate? I suspect, I don't know this for sure, but I suspect most people in this room graduated in 4 years with a bachelor's. Because I did. It was accepted. That's kind of typical. Now it is unusual to graduate in 4 years with a bachelor's. It is very common to take 4.5 years, 5 or 6 years, and be going, not because you dropped out a semester, but because instead you've been taking classes and it just takes that much longer to get it done. And so what this does is that this bill, it puts on the front page of every major what it is, how long the average graduate, for their matriculation, the amount of matriculation that they did, how long it took them to graduate. For instance, Fort Hays State and K-State and KU may all be different for business administration. Well, then how about the amount of debt? And that's, so the same thing applies there, that what's the average amount of debt that you might get at K-State, KU, Fort Scott, or wherever you're going to go to school at, wherever the student's going to go to school at. The average amount of debt to graduate in that field, the average starting salary, and how long does it take to pay off that debt? If you pay, there are some of those that if you don't pay 50% of your salary, you never can get this total debt paid off in your lifetime, because the amount of debt is so high based upon the starting salary. Okay, now that doesn't mean their salary can't go up, and I understand those things, but at the same time, there's a lot of difference in that. So I thought, and I'm excited, and fortunately the rest of the legislature kind of agreed, said, you know, this is kind of good information. We ought to have that out there. And so we put this bill together. How long to pay off the student debt if 10, 20, 30% of the salary is forwarded or put towards the debt. And there's several other things that are on this types of information that are put on there. The CLEP bill. CLEP is a college level examination program. When I was in school, I'm not even sure they had CLEP. They called it Quiz Out. I didn't do any of that. But nevertheless, CLEP is a nationwide program, and they have like 30 different tests for algebra 1, algebra 2, calculus, English, and literature, and there's a whole list of them that they do. And if you take that, you can get so many credits for English or algebra or whatever it happens to be. Well, that's all well and good. The difference is that sometimes in the state of Kansas, I'm talking about, KU will accept some, but not others. K-State will accept some of those, but not all of those. And Johnson County and Fort Hays State and Dodge City Community College and Labette Community College, they're all different. There's a couple of community colleges that don't accept any. There's none of them that accept all of the CLEP test. And so what this does is just says if they pass this CLEP test, it can go towards their major, towards graduation. Oh yeah, right. I've been talking about it. This bill is a cleanup from last year. It on greater scheme of things doesn't amount to anything. We passed a bill last year that encourages GEDs. As we talked about language acquisition, well, it's extremely difficult if you don't even have a high school diploma to have any kind of a success. And obviously there are a number of students that have dropped out over the years, and it's not just that 20, 22, 25-year-olds. I mean, we're talking about those that may be 30 and 40 years old that don't have a high school diploma, and so or equivalent. And so what this does, it allowed and in fact encouraged the community colleges and others to be able to go back and try to seek out those individuals, bring them in, get it, and move forwards toward GED, and to be able to get a technical certificate in something, welding, nursing, some kind of a technical certificate. And what this bill does, that was last year's bill. What this bill does, it adds, JOCO was not on that bill Johnson County Community College was not on that bill last year, and they were added this year. So, what happens is that you get through all this, and towards the end of the session, it's kind of your opinion. You're saying, you know, it's been pretty rough, but I'm making it okay. Kinda. You know, and there are many of us, I think, that kind of feel that way. Some years worse than others. Yeah, last year it would have been without any feathers at all. But nevertheless, even this year, it's been kind of like that. And then there are some problems like this. You know, what in the world? How do we solve this? This is not something you typically stand around. And so you stand around thinking, there ought to be a way to deal with this particular problem, but I'm just not sure what we're going to do. Well, this is kind of the same situation at the legislature. And that's what it was with 2741. Ron alluded to it earlier. That's the education finance that he was chair, I was vice chair of this interim committee that gathered, I mean, he's right, reams and reams of data trying to get it. And some of it was trying to like pull teeth. It was extremely difficult to get. We got a lot of it. There's still some, and I'm going to mention it here in just a moment. Extracurricular. How much does it cost for extracurricular activities in any school district in the state of Kansas? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Because the cost of those extracurricular activities are spread out into a bunch of different charts of account. You know, some of it's put into the transportation, some of it is put into instruction, some of it is put in building and maintenance, others, it's just student support, staff support. There's all these different charts of accounts, the cost for extracurricular, so nobody knows. And I guarantee it's not because we didn't try to get that information. I mean, multiple times we have tried to get that in various ways that we've tried to accomplish it without success. So, this is the Education Finance Bill. There are several goals and I'm happy to talk about it if anybody wants to talk about it in any way, shape, or form. And I don't know what happened to what time is it? Oh, okay, we're not going to spend much time here then. Several goals the bill tries to meet. Finance of K-12 education. That kind of makes sense. Per the Supreme Court ruling, and that's one of the things that I'm going to go back and allude to what Ron talked about. What part of the problem is that we've had in the state of Kansas, and even to this date, is due to things that happened in the mid-'60s and in 1990. Now, I'm going to pick on those two right now. The Supreme Court said that there had to be a rational, logical reason for the amount of funding. You can't just pick a number out of the air. I would suggest that the Constitution, a straight reading of the Constitution, the legislature is accountable for funding. And how do they achieve that? Well, the Constitution leaves that up to the legislature. Therefore, if they pick a number out of the air, that ought to be good enough.
That's it.
But that isn't what the Supreme Court said. The Supreme Court said it had to have some kind of a logical, rational reason for doing that. And so this bill that Ron and I have introduced and worked on as a result of that interim committee and other information is we tried to achieve that goal. All educational funding is provided through the state aid, not LOB. All LOBs across the state are removed. For purposes of state aid, defined educational purpose. Currently, educational purpose is not defined. And that's a question I have asked for a number of years now, at least 8 or 10 that I know of, is what does it mean to be an educated person in the state of Kansas? It's not something that we discuss. I mean, I've discussed it a lot, and I've talked with individuals and groups, but as a state, as a group, I suspect that this group, and this is a fair number of people, but it's still small relative to Wichita, relative to the state of Kansas. I doubt that this group hasn't discussed it, let alone the state of Kansas. The legislature surely has not. For purposes of state aid, obtain less expensive interest rate on bonding. Right now, every district can issue bonds with the vote of the people and get the best rate they can, but they don't go through the state. Well, if we go through KDFA, Kansas Department of Finance, KDFA, whatever that stands for, then they obviously get a much better rate. And so that's one of the objectives of this bill. Encourage successful students as defined by increasing number of college degrees and technical certificates. Again, I'm going to go back to what Ron talked about. He had the charts up there that showed that the lines have been flat or declining on test scores. And it really doesn't make too much difference on what test you're talking about, whether you're talking about the state assessment or whether you're talking about NAEP scores, ACT, basically flat. I mean, the scores have not shown a proportional increase. You saw how much the money has gone up for bond and interest. The money for the amount of money spent on total of education has gone up in a like fashion from 03-04 to this year. And yet, from that period of time, we have not seen a concomitant increase in outcomes. It has been, as you saw, either flat or declining. And where I was going with that is that my contention is that it really doesn't make any difference. Because what I want to urge you to consider is that how many of you either own a business, or you work for somebody, or you used to work for somebody if you're retired. That may be everybody. And so what I am suggesting is that how many of you, when you hire an employee or when you went to work for somebody, that they said, what'd you get on the state assessment? How did you do on the ACT? They never ask that. I own a business. I have for 38 years. Well, longer than that. But I mean, I started my first business that's chasing a rabbit. But nevertheless, I have never asked a person, what did you get on the state assessment or ACT or anything like that? My first business was in high school. I bought 2 trucks and hay equipment and started hauling hay during the summers. That was in high school. I was a junior in high school. Not once did I ask the employees that I asked. I said, are you strong enough to lift up and pick up and throw hay bales? That was kind of fundamental. Well, the question you ask now that I ask is, can you spay a dog? Do you know medicine on what is Addison's disease? You know, those type things. It has nothing to do with what is ACT or state assessment. And I would venture that it's the same thing for every one of you. If you're a manufacturer, what do? I'm hiring welders. Can you lay a bead? Do you know what 6011 rod is, or 7018 rod, or MIG and TIG, and all those things? Do you know what those are? You could care less what they got on the ACT. My contention is that we need to be focused on on the certificates and or the degrees, because I contend that education, we must be focused on how to define education, what to mean to be an educated person in the state of Kansas. I am contending that it is absolutely that the student has an opportunity to be on the path to middle class. That is it right there. Okay, the reason I picked that is because it is you're able to buy a house, provide for your family, pay your taxes, buy a few toys. That is that is, in our scheme of things, that's what we're interested in. If you don't have either a college degree or a certificate, the odds on that are extremely slim. Does it mean impossible? No, it's not impossible, not at all. And, I've had it pointed out to me, that Bill Gates did not have a college degree. He went a couple semesters and dropped out. Yeah, that's true. But the fact is, statistically, Bill Gates is not likely to happen. Did it happen? Occasionally. Some of you may be there, but I would argue that most of you are not. Per the Supreme Court ruling, the Kansas educational system should utilize the Rose Standards. And I disagree with the Rose Standards. I think they are archaic and outdated and should be thrown away. Is that a bias? Too much bias? Anyway, but nevertheless, the Supreme Court, in order to try to do that, I believe that we should do that. And what it is that we suggested that the KSBE, the Kansas State Board of Education, utilize these amongst other methods to accredit schools. Strategies to obtain the above goals: it removes all the LOB tax and includes a statewide 35 mills. With that 35 mills, most school districts go down actually on their mill levy. Optional local property tax for non-educational purpose. For instance, if somebody says that we cannot, that's the reason that extracurricular, and by the way, there's a difference between extracurricular and co-curricular. It's relatively simple. Co-curricular, there's a class involved. So you have a drama class, and you also have to have participate in the school play or whatever that is. That's co-curricular. Your FFA, you have a FFA class, and you have to go to judging contest on the weekend. That's co-curricular. Football. To my knowledge, I don't know of any football class in any USD. There may be, but I'm not aware of it. In addition to that, how many academic classes in English does anybody say, you're not doing too well in algebra. You've got a D in algebra, and if you don't bring that up, I'm going to kick you out of my English class. That doesn't happen. And yet, it does on football, basketball, extracurriculars. So if it's truly an educational, isn't that a right that you cannot forego? I would argue that it is. I think there's other things, drug tests involved, and nevertheless, it's change the methodology for equalization of capital outlay. I dislike what we're doing currently. It's based on the appraised valuation, property tax appraisal, and that perhaps that used to be a good indicator of wealth. It's not now. And so what it is, we also use three indicators for that. The one indicator is still property value, appraised value, but it also median household income as well as median house sales. All of those are commonly available in all the USDs because you can have a high property wealth. For instance, I'm going to pick on Blue Valley. I doubt that anybody would drive through Blue Valley School District and say, this is a really poor district. I'm about done. A really poor district. A really poor district. But and yet you drive through Clearwater, Coldwater, Kansas, all my district, and you're saying, these folks, half the buildings are empty on the main street, and there's no one going to say that this is a wealthy district. And yet, Blue Valley gets equalization dollars, Coldwater does not. And there are several districts around like that. Creates a bond and interest study committee. It's part of that, and that I already went over. Establishes UFG healthcare. I've gotten a lot of flack about this. That says, well, it's going to be a high deductible. The fact is that can be gotten around if it's some school district. I mean, and that's what happens for me personally, as a matter of fact, is that I have some employees that we have a very high deductible, but then you go back to Geico or Progressive or something like that and get some of these little short-term insurance policies. And by short term, they pay for the first day of hospitalization or something like that, you know. So you can pick those up if you need to. But as far as statewide, it would do that. It also establishes the Kansas Educational Freedom Act and ESA. That's an educational savings account. I am sorry this is taking so long. I'm referring back to what Ron said about who's in charge. And that's another fundamental question that I believe. It's not only for public education about who's in charge, but also for your particular child, who's in charge. And see, right now, the state is. The state's in charge. Because in order to do anything other than public education, you must be wealthy enough to send it to private school. That is the alternative. If you're low income or moderate income and can't afford $5,000 to $10,000 per year in order to send them to private school, what are your options? Your options? Public school. For a school setting, that's it. Anyway, that's ESA. It does that. It allows 70% of the monies for that particular school district to go follow the student. This type of thing has been tested. It's been challenged in other states. And it is, at least some courts have found it to be acceptable. And the way that we've done it, this is something Ron did a lot of work on, and I want to thank him, but he did a great job in putting this thing together. And then occasionally, if you just keep your eye on the ball, you can get it even though there are some challenges involved. And so far, we're close, and it looks like we might. With that, thank you.
Superb presentation, superb. We are officially out of time. If you need to leave, please feel free to do it. But I think we can maybe prevail on these two gentlemen to do an extra 5 or 10 minutes for Q&A.
Well, I understand that if the Supreme Court doesn't go along with your last proposal in the legislature, that they could actually close down the schools in Kansas. Now, how would they do that? Would they send out the National Guard? Would they send out the Kansas Highway Patrol to lock the schools down? How would that work?
That question has been kind of debated, to be quite honest, because as you are alluding to, the Supreme Court does not have any military or law enforcement ability, and there are those that believe the legislature has because of I'm going to use the word immunity, because of actions occurs, because you can't be sued or arrested because of the work of your actions or something like that. I forget how that's worded, but nevertheless, words like that. And so how would that work? That's up in the air. There have been lots of speculation on how it might work. Perhaps they would do an injunction against the treasurer. That is a possibility. I don't know how it would work, because hopefully it doesn't ever go there. I honestly don't think it would go there, but perhaps an injunction. We don't know.
Last year, Maine's school district wanted to do a bond issue, and so they waited until there were no elections going on, and they sent out a mailer, and most of my neighbors didn't realize it, didn't open it up, they didn't take the time to fill it out and vote for it, yet it surprisingly passed. I think that's not an appropriate way to tax the residents of a school district. Is there any way that we can make that an illegal practice?
You're talking the mail-in, is that what you're talking about, or?
Yes, instead of a polling station.
Oh.
We have moved, with the law, we moved all of those elections to be in November, so it will be however the November elections are handled. So some counties, they use mail-ins, others, you have to go to the polling station, but that's local. We can't.
Yeah, this was for a bond issue.
I understand. The bond issues have been moved to November as well.
With this bill, if it passes.
With this bill, if it passes, which is what we're trying to do, so that the public is better informed and they have a better chance to find out what's going on. They've always wanted to do them in April because they can get their friends to go vote for it, and their general public doesn't know anything about it. So we've tried to move that, and we're going to hopefully get it done.
So quite a few states have charter schools, and in those states they work pretty well, especially for students of low income, like we have a lot of here in Wichita. So in this new school finance plan, I don't see charter schools mentioned at all. And that's especially troubling to me because in December, this audience will remember that Senate President Susan Wagle said they're working on a charter school bill that would be introduced this year, but I don't believe that's happened. So here we are on the cusp of a huge shift in the way we're financing schools, but I don't see that charter schools are going to be allowed to flourish in this.
Kansas has one of the worst charter school laws in the country. And to change that will be a storm that nobody really wanted to step into this year. This is a huge storm that we've stepped into, but the charter school is a situation where we are facing the entire education community. Our law right now puts the local school district in charge of any charter school that's in their district. And what do you think they want to do with that school? Make sure it fails. So that's where we are in charter schools. But with this bill we're talking about, it would allow private schools, and you could have some of these Khan academies, you could have all kinds of things happening, and opportunities for teachers and higher salaries that nobody's ever thought of before. So there could be a lot of good things happening. But we chose to go this route rather than the charter school route because it opened up more doors.
I would add to that just also is that this 2741, as difficult as it is, and it will be a challenge to get it through, it still takes 51%, 2163, and one signature, which is a difficult challenge, but nevertheless possible. The problem with charter schools, in order to make them, there is a constitutional issue that I have not run into any attorney yet that has said we can just implement charter schools as you will, like many other states have, without changing the Constitution. And that would require significantly, it's a supermajority, in other words, to change it, and then go to the vote of the people. But you have to get the supermajority of the House and the Senate both. And so that's also the reason I would agree with Ron also, but it's a constitutional issue, whereas this is a statutory issue.
Thank you both for being here. I think the most alarming information that you brought here today is the size of the USD debt. Every dollar spent in debt service is a dollar less for education. And the numbers that you gave are alarming. It's okay in a time of low interest rate. What about if the interest rates go up? Is this locked into low interest? Can you tell me, is this for buildings? Or, is this an ongoing thing? What about that debt and what are we gonna do with it? And should it be against the law? Because every dollar in debt service is a dollar taken away from education.
Yes, my understanding is that the interest rate is locked because they're bonds, and the bonds are going to be locked in at whatever the rate is, 4 or 5%. The state currently is 3-point-something%. That's also the reason tried to go that direction because it's just a little bit cheaper interest rate, but it would be locked in also.
Well, you don't know half the story. I asked for information on how much each school district is paying to belong to organizations like the Association of School Boards, Association of Superintendents. And then in the last column they sent me, it was the amount of money each school district was sending in for the lawsuits. And we won't talk about that today. That's another day.
One more, or maybe one more after this. Go ahead.
All of the debt outstanding is approved by the taxpayers in the local district. By the way, I am the school board member in Goddard. We have $77 million in debt. Our average rate of interest is 2.58%. We just refinanced our last bond issue last Monday night. However, my question is, if you have 70% of the money following the child, and you have a state constitutional issue about being under the local control of the State Board of Education, and everything I'm hearing this legislative session is about transparency and accountability. How do you account for the accountability part if the money goes to homeschool with nothing being under the direction of the State Board of Education?
First of all, I'm going back to the constitutional answer. There is nothing constitutional in there about that says there must be some sort of a state assessment or anything to follow up. And that's the reason I also said, who's in charge? Because if the parents are in charge of their own student, of their own kid, then they're going to be the ones to make determination about, I am happy with this particular situation. But if the state is in charge, then the question remains is that should the public be happy with the scores that we're getting? Goddard has been doing, on the state assessments, been doing pretty well. They've done some good things. But there are many districts around the state that we should be embarrassed about the results. And yet at the same time, we're worried about sending some dollars for a parent to take care of their own kid. That sounds like a dichotomy to me. As far as the constitutionality of it, I believe it is constitutional. I believe it follows completely.
Yeah, when I read the Constitution, it said you were responsible for public education. Well, to me, public is all the kids in the state. And the only school excluded from the Constitution being financed is religious institutions. So to me, I see nothing prohibiting private schools from being financed by the Constitution, and this ESB is a good way to go. But I think that there's nothing prohibiting. We actually have government schools, private schools, and religious schools. So why do you see a prohibition against helping private schools?
Well, I didn't, and I talked to states who have initiated something like this, and we all agreed that that's something, if the money, all the taxpayers of the state put their money in a pool, and that includes those that homeschool and send to private schools, should they not have, be allowed access to some of that money at least? It'll go through the treasurer, and then they apply for and so forth and do all of that. But it's not, everybody wants to use the term public money. It's not public money, it's taxpayer money. And if the treasurer has it, they give it to the parent, and then the parent decides. So the parent is controlling the taxpayer money. Now, will it be challenged? You absolutely bet it will be. It'll be a big fight, but at least we have to try. We have to do something right now.
Let's give a big hand. Let's give Ron Howard. Thank you for